Okay, well, welcome. Hello, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning for all of you who are calling from various time zones. My name is Lisa Caulfield, and I am the director of the Notre Dame Global Center here in beautiful Connemara, the Kylemore Global Center. It is our fifth installment of the Kylemore Book Club, and I warmly welcome you to this evening's session. We've entitled this newest installment To Hell or to Connacht, Stories of Irish Resilience. And it really came as a kind of a brainchild of ourselves and Connacht Rugby, who we partnered with this year or for this particular session, and just to kind of tease out the sort of saying to hell or to Connacht. And it helps me explain why Kylemore, we're here in Kylemore too, despite the reasonings behind the inclement weather and the rough landscape that you can sometimes perceive it to be. But so in this series, we're going to explore, and today is in particular, just a little bit about the history of that saying. And then we're looking at stories of Irish resilience through the lens of rugby. And I just want to say from the onset, the purpose we've had with these sort of digital communities is to have community, to provide an opportunity for us to engage with material from our professors of the University of Notre Dame, and then also to engage with the local community here in Ireland. So to date, we're humbled. This Kylemore Book Club is just past its year anniversary with Think ND, and we've had a lot of interest in the book club. We've had over 1,200 registered participants representing 25 countries from around the world who have registered on the Think ND platform. So I just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone who's sponsored this and our co-collaborators, which include, of course, Notre Dame International, the Keogh Naughton Institute for Irish Studies, the College of Arts and Letters, the Keogh School of Global Affairs, Notre Dame Learning, of course, and for this series, the Notre Dame rugby team, the Notre Dame Alumni Association, and of course, Connacht Rugby. As is our tradition, we normally have a breakout session, and what we'll do at this for this hour, we'll do it at the end. So we'll provide you the opportunity to meet your fellow book club participants and just share your impressions of the discussion that we've had over the last hour. Should you not wish to break out into the Zoom function at the end of today's hour, then simply leave the Zoom meeting. Otherwise, we'll be randomly putting you into smaller groups. We're also asking that if you have any questions for our panelists today, that you use this Google form that Zoe, my colleague that helps us in the Galway study abroad program, is sharing. This will allow us to facilitate questions and group them accordingly to the panelists. So if you have a specific panelist that you'd like to direct it, just mention the person's name in your question. And I'd like to thank all of you who've pre-submitted questions in advance of today's session. We will try and answer as many of them as we get to, and please remember that if we don't get to them today, we do have a discussion board on the LinkedIn platform. So if you just go onto LinkedIn and find the book club, you can join us for a wider group discussion. So Zoe has shared the link into the Google Forms, and now to introduce our three panelists today. First, I'd like to welcome Professor Rory Rappel, who has supplied us with those two videos with regards to the Cromwell quote, "To hell or to Connacht." So thank you, Rory, for giving us the context. Rory's background includes political thinking in early modern Britain and Ireland in the Atlantic world. He's also interested in the violence in early modern Europe, the military culture in early modern Europe, and aspects of political and social culture in Ireland during the 20th century. Rory has written extensively about the methods used in the administration of the Crown Army in Tudor and early Stuart Ireland, from the eve of the 9 Years' War to the unfolding of Strafford's plans for a new army, which is a part of a wider survey of the character of the Tudor and Stuart administration in Ireland. Rory, welcome.
I was once a second row as well, but very bad, very bad. Sad story. Go on.
Well, next up, we're going to introduce you to Eamonn Molloy of Connacht Rugby. And he has been at the forefront of education and learning with Connacht Rugby and the IRFU for over 15 years. Having played and coached and traversed the amateur to professional transition of the game, he now educates the next generation of coaches. Eamonn became the youngest coach in the All-Ireland League when he took up his first role at 25 and went on to coach Connacht age grade teams and the Irish colleges. Since moving into education, he has mentored countless coaches, forged a worldwide network of rugby knowledge, and has educated people internationally for world rugby. He holds a commerce degree at NUI Galway and is currently completing a master's in leadership development. He's also, I'm proud to say, a Notre Dame alumni from our inspirational leadership program we have here at Kylemore. He is a fluent Irish speaker and has been a mainstay of TJ Cahir, which is our Irish television broadcasting and radio for the rugby coverage for over 10 years, and regularly contributes to news programs for both national and local channels. Also on the call, so welcome, Eamonn. Thank you for joining. And now I'd also like to introduce Justin Hickey of the Notre Dame rugby team. Justin joined the rugby program in May of 2016 as program director, and he is in charge of the men's and women's rugby club. Men's rugby, he's also the men's rugby head coach. Prior to joining the University of Notre Dame, Coach Hickey served 5 years as head coach of the Clemson University rugby program. Hickey has also served as assistant coach for the USA Rugby Collegiate All-American since 2015, and most recently toured Australia with the team in the summer of 2016. Previously, he worked for 2 years as manager of the USA Rugby Under-20 Junior All-American team that competed in the IRB Junior World Rugby Trophy. And they also won the World Championship in Salt Lake City and in June 2012, earning the USA promotion to the IRB Junior World Championship competition in 2013. That is a mouthful. Justin, welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. You got through it.
Thank you. I'll start with Rory, actually, because we had some early questions for the topic, and with questions that were pre-submitted. And I guess the first one, in the context of your lecture that you gave, the question came in: if you could explain what it means to be a parliamentarian during this period of the mid-17th century.
I suppose, listen, possibly the best way into this that's compatible with the discussion as a whole is to talk, I suppose, about how the interaction between these parliamentarians, very briefly, and what happens relative to all these Irish landholders moving to Connacht. Basically, there's a war going on in England. The Parliament is made up of the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and they have both their figures in the House of Lords who are all, descendants of aristocrats. The members of the House of Commons are all elected. The problem is, however, when you're talking about the king at that time, which is Charles I, he's king of Scotland, he's king of England, and he's king of Ireland. And it's almost like when worlds collide, these three kingdoms at the time, it's like their orbits are all messed up and they're going to collide. So the parliamentarians, it's sort of like the Brexit situation at the moment. The parliamentarians, the English parliamentarians, because each area has its own parliament, the English parliamentarians have their own agenda. And their own agenda in the period that we're talking about is to often religiously motivated. And the thing that they hate most of all is Catholicism. And Ireland, of course, is a hotbed of Catholicism. And to cut a long story short, I suppose, they want to put down what they see as insurrection in Ireland, but this costs money. So they have to pay for it. And they decide to pay for it by, in advance, using as collateral that they will seize all the land of Irish Catholics in Ireland. So, they're getting a loan in order to have an army in Ireland. In order to do that, they say to the people in the City of London, etc., listen, we're going to dispossess all the Irish Catholics and we're going to use this army. But between that transaction and them actually sending this army over to Ireland, what happens is that they have this massive falling out with the king, which means that the army that they, the deposit that you got for the motorboat, you use for a motorbike instead. What they do is they use the deposit that they got for, or the loan they got for this army in Ireland, and they use it for a war against their own king, who himself is trying to pull together all types of resources. So that lasts 10 years. At the end of it, they return to what they had done in the first place, or they meant to do in the first place. But the parliamentarians, House of Commons, House of Lords, this is the English Parliament, House of Lords, all descendants of aristocracy. Members of Parliament in the House of Commons are elected.
Did Oliver Cromwell really say to hell or to Connacht?
It's ascribed to him. I mean, and I would be loath to take that sort of dry as dust historian's approach to an anecdote like that necessarily. It could well have been the case that he said it. I mean, contemporaries at a certain point take a note of Oliver Cromwell's table talk. I don't think it turns up in his table talk, but it doesn't mean that people weren't, taking note of what people said. A significant person like Cromwell said to him. I mean, for contemporaries, if you had gone to, sort of dine with Oliver Cromwell, you were dining with somebody who was a phenomenon, a sort of Napoleon of his age. He'd come from, relatively humble beginnings to being, in effect, the head of state in England. So if you were going to dinner with Oliver Cromwell, you'd take along if you weren't taking along a physical notebook, you'd be listening to what he said. And so if he said to hell, they can go to hell or to Connacht, you'd think, oh, that's good. And you go home and possibly take it down. So I wouldn't absolutely discount the idea that he did say it, but I can't say, well, go to volume 6 of Clarendon's history of, the Great Rebellion, and you'll find it on page 134. Yeah, can't do that, unfortunately.
I suppose he was he was a man of opportunity, and he found himself in the right place at the right time, right? Between, the regicide and so the sort of military conquest or prowess that he had here in Ireland, did he have similar success in other parts of the world?
No. I mean, he actually has more success in England and in Scotland actually than he does. I mean, as an analogy here, I know it may be a bit of a corny analogy, but we're talking about if we're talking about rugby as well, what we're talking about when we look at somebody like Oliver Cromwell is we're looking at he's a great cavalry officer. He's a great leader of cavalry, but he's not good at everything. So the sort of military campaign that he fights in Britain is largely won on the fields. So at the Battle of Dunbar in Scotland, or, at Marston Moor, something like that, it involves, a particular type of warfare. When he comes to Ireland, it's mostly siege warfare. And he's not very good at that, relatively. I mean, the analogy I would put here is that you could imagine, in rugby terms, Oliver Cromwell being a great forwards coach. Or no, actually, we're talking about movement here. So he'd be a great coach for backs. So he'd be great at the back line, great at working with all of that, and great with working with fluidity of getting the ball out to the right man at the right time. But he wouldn't be good with forwards. He wouldn't be good necessarily in the scrum and that sort of locked down condition. However, in Ireland, it's very much that sort of stop-start fortifications holding out against him, and there being siege warfare. And he's not good at that. He for example, at Clonmel, there's a siege in Clonmel where he takes very, very bad casualties because he just doesn't know his basic, I suppose, gamesmanship when it comes to having doing good siege warfare in the middle of the 17th century.
And I suppose his work that he managed to convey in Ireland, Rory, like the work, like his sort of plantation of the people that he was able to have, it had an effect though, right? For over the next 250 years in Ireland, it's just never seen the sort of it's changed indelibly, right?
Massively. I mean, you could say that this is really the conquest of Ireland. What happens at the end of the 16th century is there's a significant change, but it's not as massive a change as you get in the 1650s. But it can be misunderstood as well. The people who are dispossessed and sent to Connacht under the dispensation of the Cromwellian settlement. And by the way, they're dispossessed of their lands, as I would have to stress, not only because we all hate Catholics or something like that. It's actually because of a financial imperative. The money has, you've got the money, you have to pay it back. So where are you going to get from? You've already sort of factored in to your accounts that this land is going to be dispossessed. But the people who are dispossessed are Catholic landowners. If you are a hewer and wood and drawer of water in, Munster or Leinster, as in the Eastern province or the Southern province, now you would have had a lousy 1640s and 1650s because Ireland was, mired in conflict and war, but you didn't own any land to be dispossessed of, probably. So the people who are sent to Connacht are actually, landowners are sort of often the better off. This is where Eamonn's aristocratic bearing comes from, possibly. It's people who are hewers and wood and drawers of water, real people who don't own much, who are sort of losers in Gaelic Irish or in early 17th century society, who are left in Leinster. And of course, if you're coming in as, I suppose, a 17th century English landowner, ex-Cromwellian soldier, or somebody who's bought land off a Cromwellian soldier into Leinster or Munster, and you're taking up this new piece of land, the person who you're actually going to have to rely on is the local worker who's worked that land for centuries, or his families have worked the land for centuries, or certainly for decades.
I suppose he also has to pay for his army, though, too, right?
No. This is the whole reason why these guys are being moved, why the dispossession takes place, is that the army has to be paid. I mean, it's a very complicated thing, and I won't get too much into it. But by the time you get to the late 1640s, you have a situation where you have three forces in the country, in England, where you have the king, and the king believes that because he's the king, he can even if he's defeated, he can be defeated 100 times, but everybody's still going to have to deal with him because he's the king. You have the Parliament, who have brought into being this army, which they haven't been able to pay. And then you have this army, which has decided that actually, these guys aren't going to pay us. So they start acting as their own political force. So you have these three balls bouncing against each other. And one of them, or three eggs bouncing against it, and one of them is going to break. And the one that actually does break is Charles, because Charles ends up annoying everybody by saying, basically, you're going to have to negotiate with me, even though you've defeated me 10 times in order to come to a settlement. But the army and Parliament are still bouncing against each other. And actually, suppressing Ireland and getting the means to pay the army is part of the transaction that brings about a sort of a relative pacification of politics in England. So the dispossession of land in Ireland and the movement of all these Catholic landowners to Connacht is in many respects collateral damage for a pay dispute in England.
I guess I had a follow-up question for that too then, Murray. Would this era of this sort of Cromwellian era and during this time, and then when, after, he kind of appoints his son, then like, is this seen as this kind of failed attempt at England creating a republic?
Yeah, I suppose you can, and this is the case, I think, anytime when there's a major political change or, lots of different people with different agenda look at what's happening and they see their own hopes and dreams made complete in it, or sometimes their nightmares made complete in it. So there would have been some people who thought, listen, this is a great opportunity to start anew and to bring about a republic in England. And certainly a lot of the language that is developed during this period by people like John Milton, John Harrington, political thinkers like that, becomes very influential and is parlayed onto, the sort of thinking and sort of concepts that are used in 18th century America when people are considering the relationship of the colonies with the King of England. So there are some people who think that listen, this is a great opportunity for a republic. There are other people who say, right, we've lost the king, but we have this charismatic individual who's a leader who can be sort of turned into, it's going to be a monarchy. So maybe let's try and return to sort of a more conservative halfway point where we still have a monarchy and we still have Parliament and actually have a House of Lords. Let's put everything back together except with new management. And then you have other people who are just looking at it and going, no, actually, there is God's anointed king is still out there. And that's Charles II, who's the son of Charles I, who's a much more politically savvy guy than his father was. So, you have groups of people looking at a chaotic situation, and they all have hopes and dreams in relation to it. But everybody has fought themselves to a standstill. So they don't want to, there comes a point in conflicts where people, even if they hold fast to what they believe strongly, they just can't afford, they don't have the energy to keep on.
I guess that's why you have the Irish contingent, like actually supporting Charles II then too, right? They want that sort of, they want that sort of.
Although you have the ironic thing as well, is that in the sort of the early 1600s, and I don't want to take in too much time away from Eamonn and Justin here, but you have the ironic thing that actually because Ireland, we talk about, obviously the COVID restrictions and quarantines at the moment, but if you were an English soldier who went to fight in Ireland, the thing that was most likely to kill you was not the Irish. It was something called the Irish Flux. And this would be a sort of a digestive ailment that would affect you. It's not so much that the bottom fell out of your world, it was that the world fell out of your bottom. And you had guys, I've read this in the 16th century now. A guy who's an English military captain in Ireland writing a letter saying, I think basically I'll finish my letter now because I feel a remarkable looseness of the bowels. And then the next letter in sequence is from his deputy, who writes and says, sorry, and I can't remember the precise name of the guy. Sorry, Captain, I don't know, let's call him Captain Mostyn. Captain Mostyn was meant to write a second letter to you, but he isn't because he's dead on the same day. So what happens is a lot of the English soldiers who come over to Ireland die of diarrhea, effectively, or dysentery. And what you have in the 1650s, or, at a certain point, is that you get a new model army, which is largely made up of Irish recruits, because the Irish recruits want to eat, and because of scorched earth policies, there isn't, there's a massive food shortage in Ireland, and the place where you'll get some bed and board is by being the Cromwellian army. So you have this weird situation where you have a Cromwellian army, which is basically full of Irish Catholics who want a meal. Be a Blas de Hagoni Supermax. And you have, you've these, you've a sort of a settlement that's going to work itself out, which is, not favorable to Catholic landowners. It's one of these paradoxes. Anyway, that's the historical context for you.
Thank you. And I'll come back to you, because I do like that we talked about that you brought in the Irish poet and gave us the Irish part of our homework. But I'll switch tacks just to bring it to Connacht rugby, I suppose, and ask Eamonn a couple of questions, and just, the reason we chose the Cromwellian phrase was to show our sort of, there's this sort of resilience within the west of Ireland, and it's not only in the in the people, but it's also in the culture and in the sport. And rugby is one of those interesting all Ireland sports, and in the province of Connacht, it has its own sort of history as well. So I was just going to say to Eamonn, when you think of like the history, or how history has impacted the mindset of people of the west of Ireland, how would you draw that parallel with Connacht rugby, and where do you see that sort of resilience?
Yeah, I suppose firstly, I was glad to hear from Rory that Leinster are actually the paupers and the water carriers, and I think in the modern era it might take some convincing to make them aware of that, but they mightn't like to hear it. No. But no, we obviously would have learned about the Cromwellian era and the Heller to Connacht growing up and through education. The first time it probably came to life in my adult life was I was fortunate enough to be part of the Connacht squad in the late 90s, just as the game was turning professional. And same as any sporting team, you get your full kit, everything rigged out. And one of the aspects was we got a series of these T-shirts, and all the T-shirts had emblazoned across the back of them to Heller to Connacht. And I suppose at that point, as Rory alluded to, there'd be a feeling within Connacht of being hard done by, or being disadvantaged, are not getting a fair slice of the cake relative to the rest of the country, and that would be prevalent throughout sport, but throughout economics, and even politically. I think as recently as 2 years ago, there was a government appointed that didn't have a minister from the west of Ireland, and it didn't become about the people who were appointed. It became about the west not having, them not seeing past the other provinces. But at that point in Connacht, when the game went professional, even at that point, Connacht was seen as a development province. So the other three provinces, Ulster, Leinster and Munster, it's an all-Ireland sport, were funded fully by the IRFU. They'd be the governing body. Effectively, in American terms, they'd be the owners of the teams, or the owners of the clubs. And Connacht was viewed as a development province and was given half the budget of the others. So in the initial stages, even when I was, as a young player coming through, that's the environment we were working under, and that's how we were going training. While other provinces may have had full-time squads of 20 or 25, we'd maybe 7 full-time players and a raft of part-time players who all had their own jobs as well. But then we were playing and training with that environment. I suppose that we were the initial stages of that professional era, and we started it with chips on our shoulders, and that would probably continue nearly right up to this day in Connacht terms, that while they're quite well funded now and have massive plans, there would still be maybe not the same financial strength of some of the other teams within Connacht or within Ireland or within Europe. And you would have a tendency of players coming here with something to prove, players from other provinces, some who've, for want of a better word, have been discarded by other provinces. All right, go on, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say, because Rory kind of, at the beginning of of our conversation mentioned that, your last name, Molloy, is a Mayo name. And, in the west of Ireland, in the, say, the county of Galway, or in the west, there's a lot of, Ireland as a nation punches above its weight with regards to our sports, right? With, we do really well in golf, we do well in, now in rowing, in the Olympics, and boxing, and then our homegrown sports, right? The GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association, with hurling and football. And even within the county of Galway, there's a divide of where there is rugby, or there's football being played, and then there's hurling being played. And for yourself, coming up out of Galway and having all of this sort of, potential sports that you can play, and also the pull for GAA, what was the pull for you for rugby, and how did that compete with your other sports, and how was that treated within your community to play for rugby, say, especially in those early days when you mentioned that it was the beginning of the sort of professionalization of it?
I think I probably felt nothing but support, really, from my own community, or the broader community. Growing up, I grew up in a hurling area. Probably my first love would have been soccer, and then through schooling, rugby took over. I suppose, without stepping on some of Justin's piece, it was probably some of those, while I wouldn't have called them values at the time, it was those aspects of rugby that probably drew me towards it, that much more camaraderie aspect, being part of a group, certainly much more than just a sport, that you're part of a grouping that, share values together, huge camaraderie, not only with your own team, but with other teams as well, with the opposition. And some of the, we could call it traditions, maybe it's ritual, the aspects, the teams having a meal together after games. It was probably those aspects that drew my love away from soccer at that point, and more towards rugby. But I would have, I probably sometimes I probably very much lived in a rugby circle or a rugby bubble during my rugby time then. And I would find with my friends from university, sometimes I'd be a bit of an outlier in conversing about Gaelic games, because there was so much more knowledge, and literally everyone could converse about it, and I wouldn't be as up to date on the latest results and all those kind of aspects. But I would say, with sport, particularly in Galway, and I would say throughout Connacht as well, and Connacht won the Pro 14 in 2016. And the crowds came from far and wide to see Connacht. They packed the airport, which was in Mayo, as the team arrived back from Scotland. Then they packed Galway City as the team were travelling through it. And likewise, there'd be a strong rugby following who would support other games as well. Like the Galway Hurlers won the All-Ireland a number of years back. And one of the things Connacht did was invite them to the stadium to parade at halftime and show the trophy. So while you're maybe kind of competing sports or competing for participants at a certain level, there's definitely a mutual respect across sports as well.
I suppose you mentioned the under 14s, and that, could you maybe explain to us, what's the route to play for your province or for Connacht? Because it'd be very, it is a professionalized sport here. And so what would be the route to can it further elaborate the route if a young man wants, or young woman would like to play for Connacht? What's the route that you would take? What does it take to play for Connacht rugby?
Yeah. So some may be fairly familiar with it. It'd be a bit different to the professional sport in the States, which is more franchise based, and even in parts of Europe as well. So Connacht would be a province. Part of that province would be the professional team. Under that, we would have the academy, but within the province, we would have numerous clubs. 27, 28 clubs, and the same number of schools. And we would create pathways. And again, our ambition would be that, you know, people have a lifelong love of the game, and they get to experience the joys of all the values of the game. For some players, that's going to be the elitism, that pathway takes them towards elite sport. For some of them, it's just going to be, you know, playing the game for as long as they can play, and maybe becoming coaches or referees or administrators. We'd be conscious within Connacht, again, of creating that community. It is a professional game. So we do have players come from all over the world. Bundy Aki, who's selected for the Lions this weekend, is from New Zealand, but certainly feels at home in Connacht. We strive to get as many of our own Indigenous players through as we can, or have a large cohort in the squad at all times, because that creates that culture. You know, again, as Rory speaks about, you have an embedded belief. And one of the things when we were creating our new vision and strategy, resilience kept popping up in relation to Connacht. And I was actually in a strategy meeting, where one of our managers said, look, we just don't like that word. You know, it feels like we're always downtrodden. We're always going to be clawing our way back up. And they actually replaced it with determination, you know, and that would have been 10, 12 years before we went on and won the championship. So a big part of ourselves is getting a large cohort of our own players through. So we do have a pathway of talent identification and academy, which works through that. And then to augment that, I suppose, players who do come in, we have a number of coaches over the years. Eric Elwood, who was coach, one of his pre-seasons, brought the players to the Aran Islands, you know, and many of you know, but for those who don't, the next stop from the Aran Islands would be New York. So it's right out in the extremities. You know, other coaches have brought them up to Inniscrone and Sligo, just to get right out into the community, and for these players coming in to feel what it's about to play for Connacht, to feel what it means to those local communities.
So I guess in these meetings then, because, you know, there's this sort of psychology behind Irish sports, I'd say, fans, that Irish, you know, and maybe Connacht too, like this idea of being an underdog and to kind of claw its way to sort of success, that's actually suits the Irish psyche. Would you feel that that's not the case for Connacht Rugby, or do you feel that you know, being on the back foot, maybe a little to claw your way into that kind of winning mentality, it's not necessarily applies to Connacht?
No, it certainly does. It certainly does. That definitely the underdog mentality. I suppose what we've tried to do is shed the thinking that we'll always be down there. You know, to really, and again, one of the in our vision and strategy, one of the key lines in it is to have pride in where we've come from, but belief in where we're going. So it's an acknowledgement. Again, coming to Rory's point, it's understanding where we've come from, understanding what has been, but recognizing we have a different future to that. It doesn't always have to be there. And a turning point in that would have been, for those, some may have watched the videos in advance, where in 2003, where the challenges of the professional game became very difficult for the IRFU, and they were looking at disbanding Connacht to reduce costs, and there was a significant cost at the time. But it was, I suppose, what the main thing that came from that was the people in the community that came behind Connacht. And some of these people wouldn't have gone to matches, wouldn't have necessarily supported Connacht. But again, to come back to Rory's point, there was a feeling this is an injustice. You know, to keep the other three provinces, get rid of Connacht is an injustice. Enda Kenny, who was a member of Parliament at the time, and now went on to become Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, spoke of a segregation of the country. He spoke out against it and spoke of it not being about rugby, but being about a segregation of the country. And again, there was different people from different communities, and leaders from hurling and other sports came out and spoke at that time. And I suppose that would have been a turning point for Connacht. So that was both a moment. It was a moment where they fought against the disbandment, but it was also a moment of realizing, right, we have to do better. You know, we can't always be just treading the water here and hoping, you know, they continue to fund us. And that has probably led to a much better collaboration with the IRFU, I have to say, as well. And, you know, and the fruits of that are us winning the championship. It's us producing more internationals. It's us producing, you know, a lot British Lion this weekend. So British and Irish Lions. So, all those things have culminated from that, we'll say, that turning point.
You shared a really great video with us to share with our Think ND community with the grassroots. I just wanted to further examine with you, to what extent community plays like for Connacht Rugby and how central it is to Connacht Rugby. And maybe that's what sort of differentiates Connacht Rugby from, say, other sporting organizations. Can you talk a bit about that? Just the sense of community and outreach that the Connacht Rugby has.
Yeah, community plays a huge part. We're built on it, and I suppose with the Connacht players, there's a sense of a boy or girl next door about them. There isn't the prima donnas in it. There, again, I can't speak of other provinces, but there's a huge accessibility to Connacht. You meet them on the streets, you meet them in coffee shops. But as I said, they'll go out and reach out to the various areas of the province, be it, through doing work. They work very closely with the hospice. And again, so all that work goes on the ground, but there is a real awareness as well in setting out a vision for Connacht that, sporting teams can be, narrow to some extent in the sense of striving for success on the pitch, and that's their sole vision. And we want that. We can't always guarantee that, but we also feel we have a bigger purpose. And going to places like the hospice, where people are in palliative care, and speaking with them. And I was part of a group that brought the trophy to the Aran Islands myself, and we went to nursing homes there. And there were people there who, could never even get as far as Galway, because of the situations they were in and the ailments they had. But they watched Connacht, continuously on the TV. And so I suppose that understanding what that means to them, and to this point, and we capitalized on it by winning the trophy, but we certainly, what people back now, be it supporters or be it sponsors, what people are rowing in behind is the story. It's that story of what we are, what we're about, what we're trying to do. Sometimes that will deliver success on the pitch, and sometimes it won't. But that ambition and that those sense of values of community and belief in what we're trying to do, and the outreach, and as I said, they're things we probably strive to maintain, indefinitely.
I have a question from Rick Redmond from Illinois, and he is interested in the professional rate. So how much are Connacht Rugby players paid? And the second part to his question was, how is it possible to purchase Connacht Rugby merchandise in the United States?
Oh, excellent. Every little bit helps, Rick, so I appreciate that. What I'll do, I can share some contact details. If you go to connachtrugby.ie, it'll probably direct you to our own store there. That's connachtrugby.ie. Elvery Sports would also be another. As regards professionalism in the game, I suppose in Connacht and throughout Ireland, most players are on six figures. That could be anywhere from 100,000 to 700,000, which is a lot in our terms. It's not major in sporting worldwide. In rugby in general, there's you could count on one hand the number of players who are now going over $1 million a year, but there have been a few players at that level. It's still not a massive sport viewership wise. I'd certainly probably feel if they were to be paid the value of the hardship they go through on the pitch, it'd want to be quite a bit higher. But no, they're the levels it's at the moment. Traditionally, and again, it's in its infancy. 20 years ago, I think Niall Hogan was scrum half for Ireland, and he was also a surgeon at the same time. So that's again a very unusual scenario in professional sport, but that was happening up until 15-20 years ago.
Thank you, Eamonn. I'll move on to Justin, and I'd just like to remind everyone to just please use the link for any question that you may have for anyone on the panel today. We're gonna shoot over to South Bend, Indiana now, and get a sense about from Justin, just how has the sport grown in the U.S. Like from your experience and from your time coaching, how would you describe the growth of rugby in the U.S. and what's the direction it's headed?
Sure. I think probably, 5-10 years ago, we flew the banner of the fastest growing sport in the US, and we saw rapid growth at all levels, especially really the grassroots. I think we've kind of plateaued and we've slowed down the last few years. Other sports have caught up, and there's just, a lot more opportunities for kids now anyways. But I think we've maybe found a more consistent growth rate where it's not so rapid at those young levels. But I think where we're seeing the most growth now, Lisa, is probably at some of the higher levels. We're just finished year 4 of Major League Rugby. This fall, we have a professional sevens competition that's both men and women that is launching. And for the last almost 20 years now, the NCAA, the governing body for intercollegiate athletics, has branded women's rugby as a emerging sport. So you're seeing more and more women's collegiate programs growing. So I think while it's still growing at the younger levels and it's getting younger and younger, we're seeing the professional game and the Olympics and the opportunities kind of post-secondary and even post-collegiate that will only help to grow and continue to grow the younger levels too. So kids see they have, opportunities beyond high school, and they have opportunities even beyond, club rugby to make a career out of it or to make it a lifelong game. So I'd be curious to see what our growth figures are and where we kind of stack up the last couple years and what the Olympics have done for us in 2016 and what they'll continue to do here going forward. But it's a steady burn and one that we're still pretty excited to see the growth going forward.
You mentioned, the women's side of rugby as well. Like, what is the balance like when you're coaching, when you see the coaching at say Notre Dame with your men's and your women's teams? Like, what do you observe in terms of kind of the opportunities for women and for men to play? Like, do you find that it's a sort of equal opportunity, and is it and do you have kind of equal interest, or is there it's a kind of a harder recruitment for one over the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be totally honest, it's not equal. I think we're all pushing to get there, right? In a lot of sport, not just rugby, where you could pick just about any university in the United States and they would have a well-established men's club that started in the 70s and the 60s and as far back as the 50s and even some in the early 1900s, whereas still today we're seeing women's clubs and intercollegiate programs just launching for the first time. Here at Notre Dame, our men's team is celebrating the 60th year this year, and our women's team is just over 10 years old. So there's more and more opportunities, and with that NCAA initiative, I think we're going to see that balance, or see that continue to balance out, and just the sport itself with as rough as it is, and maybe the stigma that it might have for a female to compete in a really a collision sport. I think we've tried to soften that image a little bit and focus more on the inclusiveness part of the sport, and that you don't need to be a certain body shape or height or size or wide or tall. There's not really barriers of entry to to any certain socioeconomic background. It's a low cost sport to play, and now that there are more opportunities, I hope that women will see that as something that's open to them, and we'll see it grow on that side as well.
I wonder, you mentioned in your interview, like in your video for the series, just about the 15 aside and then the 7 aside. Can you kind of give us an explanation of like the difference of the game, and why has the 7-a-side evolved from it, and tactically, how does that change the game, and is it more fun to watch 7-a-sides or the 7? So just curious as to why that evolved, and what's the take up on it, and what's the kind of audience response to it.
Yeah, I think the easiest comparison is 15-a-side is more of the typical American football game, or the the soccer 80-90 minute, we play 80-minute halves. It's more tactical. It requires a lot more physical exertion to work your way up the field and to stop the opponent. So maybe not as exciting to the typical American sports fan, where we like to see high scoring and fast pace and a lot of action. What you're seeing in a lot of sports here, whether it's baseball or football, there's changes in the rules and in the laws, and rugby's doing the same to try to speed up the game and get more ball in play and get more scoring, to become more of an entertainment sport for fans. So 15s is kind of that long marathon, grueling, talk about overcoming some and having some resilience. There's parts in the game where you feel like you need to quit, you're battered and you're bruised, and mentally you're drained, and you just got to kind of keep going. Where 7-a-side is on the same size field. It's abbreviated game, so it's developed to be able to play tournament style multiple games over a weekend, and it is exciting. It's a sprint. It's anaerobic. It requires stop start and various skills of being able to get up in the air and get back off the ground and repeat efforts over and over for 15 minutes. But it's lended itself well, I think, to the TV audience here in the United States, where we want to get our commercials in and we want to be able to run ads. So there's time at halftime and there's time after a 15-minute game. But if you're in the stands for a sevens tournament, it's just nonstop action. You're into the game, 15 minutes goes by, boom, now there's 2 more teams running on, and it's high scoring and it's fast paced. So it's a little bit of something for everybody. I think some of us traditionalists and in Ireland as well, it took a few years to kind of embrace the 7-a-side. We like the tactics of 15 and kind of the chess match that it is, but sevens has a place as well, and it's been able to provide a lot of exposure for the game here in the United States.
And do you have a preference on what to like of coaching? Is it 15-a-side? It sounds like it's harder because it's more tactical and more.
Yeah, I think sevens is a cruel sport for a coach, because you can have the best game plan in place and anything can happen in 15 minutes. You have a couple missed tackles, you have a couple turnovers, and the next thing you know, you're on the wrong side of it. And we saw it, unfortunately, with the USA in the Olympics just a couple weeks ago. They were playing against Great Britain in the quarterfinal. They played about the best 6 minutes of rugby we've seen them play, probably since before the pandemic. They were up 21-0 and going to halftime with a 3-try lead, and they lose the game 26-21. It got turned on its side. Like I said, a couple mistakes, a couple calls that were maybe marginal and could have gone either way, and they're out of the medal round. So it's tough as a coach when you, like I said, you think you've got a great game plan in place, and kind of any game, anything can happen. I like sevens in the sense that I love them both, but it's a change of pace. You go through a long 15 season, and it's a nice change of pace, but it's really nice in the sense that it feels like a basketball roster. You have a roster of 12 to 14, so you can get really intimate with your team. You can get really detailed with the finer points of the game, where in 15s, if you're managing a roster of maybe 30 to 50, it can be a little more high level at time and not, as much kind of detail oriented. So I like that about it, but there are definitely a lot of positives for both, but it's nice to have that little bit of variety throughout the year as a coach.
And tell me one final question for you. Does the terminology or the saying to hell or to Connacht resonate with you? And if so, in what capacity? Or is it just a kind of turn of phrase for you?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm learning right along with, I think, all the participants here, and having Rory at the start kind of gave me a real appreciation for what it's meant. But no, I'll have to get over and spend more time with you all, Lisa, to have a even greater appreciation for it.
Absolutely. Open invitation, Justin. So the next time, and I have to say, Clifton has a beautiful pitch that is, I think, perhaps the most stunning rugby pitch I've ever seen. I do have a question that came in through the chat, or for Eamonn, about just the Connacht team finding talent. You know, do you pull from your local community? Like, does the Connacht team have trouble finding talent? And you know, do you have to look further afield, like for places like New Zealand or Fiji? Like, how does Connacht recruit, I suppose, and how do you pick the team?
Yeah, like I suppose there's multiple ways really of identifying talent. We'd have a large cohort to come through our own system. If you're to take under 14s or under 15s, we'd probably have a look at 150 players within Connacht alone. As players move up, out of that 150, you might get, 10 or 15 might make an academy from those 14-year-olds. When they're 18 or 19, we bring them into academy, and that's the first point at which they become professional. But then as regards the Connacht team, once you're that step from academy upwards, you're really competing against everyone who's available. It's a marketplace. And so, as I said, we would try and keep a certain percentage. You can't let the quality drop, but we try and keep a common churn of our own players coming through. So we've a cohort within the squad. But likewise, you would have players from New Zealand who become available, and may be interested in traveling over here. You would have players from the other provinces, so particularly Leinster at the moment produced quite a number of players. And again, I suppose a policy within Ireland is that, like, if there are people good enough, but there's another player blocking their path in Leinster or somewhere else, let's move them around, so move them to Connacht. So again, going, if they make correlations with Rory's historical piece, Connacht is seen as sometimes as the land of opportunity, as well, in that sense, and that where paths can be blocked for professional athletes elsewhere, Connacht can open a door for them to step on their careers.
Before I allow us to go into breakouts, I do want to go back to Rory for just to circle back to the poets, Far Dorhol Milan. I'm sorry for my butchering of it, Rory. But if you could just, I'm so happy that you gave us the poem to engage with, as well as the Irish and the English. And can you just give us a kind of a brief sort of context for the poet? And I know Brendan O'Bucla had done work on it as well. It was just so on him. So just to give us a sense of the lament, the poem that we
well, yeah, no, there's two things here really working here. Is that number one is that it's an aristocratic or gentry sort of lament. I mean, what's being talked about here is, as I said, it's we're talking about Irish poetry that's written in that particular tradition is something that comes from it's not a subaltern discipline, it's not a subaltern type of literature as such within Irish society. It actually has a certain type of aristocratic bearing, but also what comes very strongly through it, and it's not surprising perhaps, are all those analogies to the fate of the people of Israel in particular. And obviously what's being drawn on there are all those books of the Old Testament, running from whether you're looking at anything that has to do, the book of Daniel, for instance, would be a great example, because it's about the captivity in Babylon, all of that sort of tenor of lamentation that you get from Jeremiah all the way across in the biblical setting, which people would have been very well across the board, actually, well acquainted with, because it would have been a central pillar of the devotional life, so specifically sacramental devotional life of the Catholic faithful in Ireland. The Catholic faithful that to a certain degree would have had a greater freedom of worship in various pockets of the country during the war that had obtained in the earlier, in the sort of 10 years previous. Because a lot of what the Irish wanted at that stage was they wanted to turn back the clock to a situation where the Catholic Church was the established church in Ireland, where the Catholic Church had church lands and there was freedom of worship. So it should be no surprise that actually the sort of the tenor, the tone here is, I mean, if people know they're Don McLean at all, it's down by the waters of Babylon, obviously, which is based on the Psalm. So that's the sort of thing that's being dealt with here. But of course, packed in that, as is so often packed in to the chip on the shoulder, is the understanding is that actually it's sort of a superiority complex sometimes. You know, I'm great. Do you not know how great I am? And this is, I suppose, the thing that is central to these this lamentation, and it runs through into 18th century Irish language poetry in particular, is that this idea. And Brandon O'Buckley, late Brandon O'Buckley, my late colleague, a tremendous man, was very good at flagging this up. The inherent expectation of vindication, and within that vindication actually vengeance in the future, that comes from, you know, the bringing low of the you know, the inherently noble person at this point in time. I mean, you get that in the Psalms all over the place. It's this common inheritance of the Judeo-Christian world, is in that, you know, you have treated us badly, Babylon, but the day will come when we will, with God's help, rise up and wreak a tremendous revenge against you. And certainly it's on the downbeat in this particular poem that we're looked at, but it's, you know, it's very much almost at the beginning of a tradition where the uptick of it, which will be, is that what you have now, we will have. The food you eat now, we will eat. You know, the houses you live in now, which were ours, will be ours again, etc. And that's that type of thing. You know, the West's awake.
Yeah, and I feel like there's resonance of it in sort of Seanos as well, that the lament, there's this sort of, and it's very common out west to have this Seanos singing and Seanos dancing, but there's that lamentation, this kind of the woe begotten me here in this part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, if one thing, and this isn't an historian speaking, this is sort of behavioral science maybe, or anecdote. If you, it's encoded in any statement of complaint or lamentation or whatever, is the idea that is I suppose a claim to be heard. You know, if you are lamenting something, or if you're complaining about something, inherent in it is the claim to be heard. And in this lamentation, it's the claim to be heard, if not by, you know, the English, by God. I mean, and this is a very common thing in Irish language literature. I mean, it goes into the 19th century, more 19th century songs. You know, you have Raftery writing about the dreadful disaster, boating disaster at Annachún. And, you know, he says at one point, "A reading and rosta nach more on fial," which is, is a finger of accusation, almost at God, which is God of graces. What a dreadful betrayal it is that this has happened. Now, it's a betrayal because there's a lot of neglect that has brought about this disaster, but also it's God, you've made this happen to these people and you've made it happen to us. What you have in store for us in the future must be a requisite, benefit that comes upon this cost. And I think that that's very much implicit in the Irish literary corpus, certainly from this dispossession on, is that we are tremendously proud people. We've incurred this cost. The benefit that eventually comes from it has to be immense. So we look forward to that. We'll plan it, and we'll mentally rehearse it. But it's sometimes too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart as well. There's a difficult tension there.
Well, we've gone a little over, so thank you. I'd like to reiterate my thanks to everyone who joined us this afternoon, this evening, or this morning, especially to our three panelists, Rory Rappel, Justin Hickey, and Eamonn Molloy, who are actually, Justin and Eamonn will be joining us for every week going forward. Next week, we have the musician and composer Phil Coulter, who wrote the rugby song, the Rugby National Anthem, who will be joining us, as well as former international and Ulster rugby player Willie Anderson, to share with us their experience of rugby. So I hope that you all can make it for next week to join us again. So thank you all for participating. Rory, especially thank you for giving us the context and for giving us some historical context with regards to Connacht and Oliver Cromwell. And for those of you who are still with us, we are going to do a brief breakout room, and you'll have the opportunity to engage with us. And I hope to see you, if not in a breakout room, but then next week for Phil Coulter and Willie Anderson. Thanks all.